everyone, and welcome back to Classic Comics. So, DC has recently relaunched the Superman titles in connection with their Dawn of DC event. Now, I've looked at the first issues of Action and Superman and considered doing videos on them. But I mean, and they're not bad. They're not bad, but I don't know. I just didn't have any real enthusiasm for them. So I thought I'd do a video on another Superman comic, and I thought of this one. So this is Action Comics number 544. Now, this is coinciding with the 45th anniversary of Action Comics. This was published in 1983, and this was kind of the last big event issue of Action Comics before Crisis. And this issue is notable because Superman's two biggest enemies, Luthor and Brainiac, got significant revamps in this issue, as you can see from the cover here. Cover is by Gil Kane. I've never liked Brainiac's feet there, to be honest. So this issue is actually divided into two separate stories. One with Luthor and then a second one with Brainiac. Now, the Luthor story is by longtime Superman creators Cary Bates and Curt Swan, who at this point had been on Superman pretty much forever. So we start in the aftermath of Superman defeating Luthor again, and they don't go into any details on the scheme. But Superman has defeated him and caused this craft that he had to crash. But then there's another crisis and Superman has to leave to go deal with it. But he says, I'll be back, Luthor. And Luthor crawls from the wreckage. He's injured. And I do like this kind of two-page spread that starts at Luthor Unleashed. It looks pretty good. And so he activates this distress signal. And that calls this robot that he had created that comes and gets him and takes him to this hidden lair. It puts him into this spacecraft and launches him into space. And Luthor sets a course with an automatic pilot. He passes out. Now, this takes him to the planet of Lexor. So, what is Lexor? So, in previous stories, Luthor had discovered this planet, this alien world called Lexor, with a human-like race living on it. And basically, he had become kind of like a hero to the people on this world. It's kind of reverse, where they see him as a hero, and because Superman is his enemy, they see Superman kind of as a villain, right? And he actually met a woman there named Ardora, and they fell in love. And so he hasn't been back there in a long time, and so the ship arrives, and Ardora is excited to see him again and is glad he's returned. Then we go back to Earth. Now Superman tracks the robot to this place, and then he destroys the lair because Luthor is gone. And the robot, though, kind of survives long enough to activate this sort of doomsday weapon, and it's this satellite that Luthor had up in space. Then we go back to Lexor, and we discover that Ardora has actually had a son, Luthor's son, Lex Jr., and on discovering that he has, a child, in this family, he decides he's going to turn over a new leaf. He's going to stop his war with Superman, and he's never leaving Lexor again. He's just going to stay here and devote himself to being a husband and a father. And as time passes, weeks pass, and he settles in on Lexor, and he's, again, kind of viewed as kind of a hero to the people here, and they embrace him. But, obviously that's not going to last, and as time passes, Luthor realizes he's still just, there's a part of him that just yearns to go back to Earth and kill Superman. And then he discovers this ancient sort of facility, some sort of alien base, which must have belonged to some previous alien race that inhabited this planet. And the technology in this place is even more advanced than the Lexorians is. Now, back on Earth, this satellite projects a force field around Metropolis, and Superman is struggling with how to deal with that. Now, once it's activated, the satellite transmits a signal to Luxor, and Luthor detects it and realizes what's happening back on Earth, and he says, you know, it's only a matter of time before Superman figures out that I'm here and comes for me. Now, Luthor also discovers that the core of Luxor is unstable, and that if the problem isn't addressed, Luxor is in danger of being destroyed, which, of course, sounds very familiar, right? And so he constructs this thing called the Neutra Rod, and the Neutra Rod channels neutrons down into the core to stabilize the core and prevent this explosion from happening that would destroy the planet eventually. And of course, he's hailed as a hero by the people and all that. But then a series of attacks occur with this mysterious armored individual who appears suddenly and destroys property and then disappears. And of course, it becomes something of a mystery. Who is this mysterious person who the Luxorians start referring to as the Marauder? And of course, eventually they turn to Lex and say, you know, can you help us find this person? And Lex like, oh yeah, sure, I can do that. And Adora, she kind of talks to him and is like, you don't know anything about this Marauder, right? And Lex is like, of course not, honey. And then there's been another attack and some buildings have been destroyed, and they're asking Luthor to investigate. Superman arrives. And, and I forgot to mention earlier, so Luxor is actually, it has a red sun, right? So Superman's powers don't work there. But, of course, here he is with his powers, and Luthor says, I'm guessing you're using some kind of basically a sunscreen, some kind of fancy suntan lotion to sort of block out the red solar rays to preserve your powers. And Superman says, yep, that's right. And he tells Luthor how he defeated the satellite. And he's going to take Luthor back to Earth. But the Luxorians defend him, and he gets hit with a laser, and it stuns him, and his powers are already starting to fade. He's not as powerful as he normally would be. Luthor manages to slip away, and then goes inside this mountain, and when he emerges, he's now in this armored suit, which he's created with this advanced technology. And then him and Superman fight. And then Luthor projects this energy beam at him, and it hits Superman, but it bounces off of him, and it strikes the Neutra Rod. And the energy from the blast then gets channeled down into the core. And Luthor is horrified at this because he knows what that means. And it ignites the core and is starting to build up a chain reaction that's going to destroy the planet. Luthor tries to save his wife and child, but of course he's not in time, and the entire planet explodes, and the Luxorians are all wiped out. Superman survives, barely, and he assumes that Luthor is dead too, and with his powers starting to fade, he decides to just retreat and head back to Earth. But of course, Luthor survived, and of course now he hates Superman more than ever because he blames Superman for what just happened, and swears he's going to go to Earth and destroy Superman once and for all. And this would be continued in Superman, in the Superman title, with I think there's like a 2-part story that sort of had Luthor coming back to Earth and renewing his vendetta with Superman. Then we had a nice pinup here, and this armor was actually designed by George Perez. It was his design, and I've always liked this portrait of Luthor. And then we get a nice little message written by Jerry Siegel, of course, who helped co-create Superman. It's basically about how him and Joe Shuster came up with the idea for Superman, and how they struggled to get him into print, and all the rejections they had and everything before they finally had success. And he thanks a lot of the people he's worked with over the years. And then there's a message from Joe Shuster as well, and then a pinup by Joe Shuster. Then we go to the second part, which is the Brainiac story. Now, this is by Marv Wolfman and Gil Kane doing the art, and they were the actual team on Action Comics. They had been doing it for, I don't know, at least a year by this point. I think maybe more than a year. But Superman, and remember, this is pre-Crisis Superman, so he's like really powerful. And he detects this crisis out in space, and he flies to this alien star system. And it turns out this is the same star system where he last fought Brainiac. Brainiac had this kind of mechanical world that he had used as a weapon against Superman. And the story had ended with Brainiac being trapped down in the core of this kind of machine world. But the sun in this star system is collapsing. It's going nova. And Superman tries to contain the explosion. But in doing so, he inadvertently creates a black hole that causes the star to collapse. And he's barely able to escape from it. And then he heads back to Earth. And then, meanwhile, in the machine world, Brainiac is still trapped in this thing. And we find out that he actually, using this machine world, had triggered the star to go nova, because he wanted to siphon off energy from its explosion to help free himself. But he apparently miscalculated, and instead of freeing himself, he winds up actually converting himself into kind of an energy state. And in this energy state, is like living energy, he winds up getting pulled into the black hole, and then he kind of goes back in time. And it's kind of the way to describe it, but he winds up actually traveling all over the universe and learning everything there is to learn. It's this story, reading it now after all these years, it's very clear that this was kind of based off of V'ger in the first Star Trek film, because this is in '83, so it's only about 4 years after the first Star Trek movie. And then he goes further back in time to the dawn of time, basically. And of course, in the DC universe, you know, it's repeatedly been depicted that the universe began with this great hand that sort of sets off the Big Bang. And this sort of energy state of Brainiac, he witnesses it. And then for some reason, don't know why, he sees this image of Superman. And then returns to the present and goes back to this machine world where the apparatus of this machine world constructs a new body for him. But he's not strictly organic. He's kind of like biomechanical. And it creates a body for him that actually grows and sort of gestates. Time passes. And then eventually he emerges from this machine world. And he's now in this new sort of more robotic looking state. And he's convinced that Superman is the angel of death, basically, and that Superman wants to destroy him. So he's determined to find Superman and kill him first. And to do that, he decides he'll need an army to invade Earth. So he attacks the first alien world he comes across and subjugates them. Then we go back to Earth, and Superman gets a distress signal from the Fortress of Solitude. And he goes there and he finds this alien, Skora of Sistis 2. And again, this is the Silver Age Superman, so he's out in space all the time, and he's well known on all these alien worlds throughout the universe. And anyway, this alien tells him, you know, Brainiac has attacked our world, please help us. And then he dies. He's puzzled because he says, you know, this doesn't sound like Brainiac. Brainiac likes to collect samples of different worlds, of different civilizations, of the people and of the technology, but he generally isn't wantonly destructive like this, so this is different for him. Anyway, he arrives, and then the aliens there attack him, and he realizes they're being controlled. So then he tries finding Brainiac. Brainiac appears and hits Superman with this missile, and it releases this burst of red sun energy, which cancels out his powers. And then the aliens beat him down and subdue him. And then he finally meets Brainiac, who tells him, you know, he's determined to destroy Superman once and for all. And then we get this another nice pinup again, and this Brainiac, which I always thought looked really cool. It was designed by Ed Hannigan. So this would be continued in the next couple of issues of Action Comics. Superman would escape Brainiac and then return to Earth in the next issue. And then the month after that, Brainiac would come to Earth with this army composed of aliens from various worlds. And they invade Earth. And it was a pretty big story. And it had the Justice League and the Teen Titans in it as well. It's really good, in my opinion. So this was actually a pretty good issue. It's better than most of these anniversary issues tend to be, because they tend to be like a bunch of just different little unrelated stories that don't amount to much. But this was actually good and a pretty big deal at the time, because, you know, normally characters didn't get revamps like this. And so even doing this for such long-standing villains, it was kind of unusual. And this was supposed to be kind of this new dawn for Superman, right? A new era. Unfortunately, it kind of came to nothing, because 2 years later, we got Crisis on Infinite Earths. And then the year after that, in '86, John Byrne would completely reboot Superman, completely redoing Superman's origin. And he would redo Brainiac and Luthor again. Luthor would become, of course, a kind of corporate mogul instead of the mad scientist he had been, which I thought was a great idea. And they've done some really good stuff with Luthor over the years since then. Brainiac, on the other hand, they've really struggled with this character since Crisis, in my opinion. When John Byrne did the reboot, first, Brainiac was actually a human. He was a human psychic who gets possessed by this alien intelligence, which boosts his psychic powers even more, you know, gives him various mental powers. Later, that version of Brainiac, he kind of mutates himself so he becomes more alien-looking, and it augmented his mental powers even more. He did that, like, right at the end of the 80s, and then he stayed that way for almost a decade, about into the late 90s, and then they introduced this kind of future version of Brainiac called Brainiac 13, which kind of brought Brainiac back to being an android, or sort of an artificial being. But that version was really only used for one story. And then in the 2000s, Jeff Johns and Gary Frank did a really good run on Superman, in which they kind of brought Brainiac back, and they kind of brought him back to what he had originally been. You know, they did a good job of updating him, but also kind of bringing him more in line with what he had long been. And I really liked that version. But that version, again, was only around for a couple of years, and then they did Flashpoint, and then New 52, and then Grant Morrison did another version of Brainiac, and I don't think he even called him Brainiac. He had some other name for him. But it was obviously that's who it was supposed to be. And then they did Convergence, the Convergence event, and that had this other version of Brainiac that, again, was like used in that one story and then disappeared. And I don't even know what Brainiac's status is now in the DCU. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. But yeah, this was supposed to be this new beginning, but it really didn't go anywhere. Now, the Luthor armor has been brought back in various forms, kind of variations over the years. But yeah, Brainiac, they just don't seem to know what to do with him. But anyway, what did you think of these versions of Luthor and Brainiac? Should DC have stuck with these? Or was it better to reboot them along with Superman After Crisis? Let me know in the comments. And also please like and share this video. And also sub to the channel. And I will see you all next time. Thanks for watching.